Kathy, are you recording?
Yes,
So, good
so
evening.
we are live.
Yep, good evening, and thank you for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Natalie Jack-Torowitz, and I'm the president of the District 34 Board of Education. Tonight's meeting was convened earlier this evening, and the board has been meeting in executive session since 6:30. Tonight, we are once again meeting virtually, which enables a larger number of viewers to participate in tonight's proceedings. I'm joined tonight by my fellow board members, John Hagee, Katie Jones, Mike KORMAN, Scott Nelson, Diane Stefani, and Jim Barmstark hopefully will be joining us shortly.
I'm here.
Oh, great. Good to see you, Jim. Also joining us tonight is our administrative team, our superintendent, Dr. Dane Deli, our assistant superintendent for teaching and learning, Dr. Matt Silverman, assistant superintendent for business services, Eric Miller, executive director of human resources, Dr. Heather Hopkins, executive director of student services, Mary Garrity, executive director for instructional innovation, Brian Engel, director of communication and strategic planning, Kathy Kajigian, director of operations, Steve Ruelli, director of EL bilingual programming, Raquel Kim, assistant director of student services, Kristen Casieres, district nurse, Kathleen Lean, and our board recording secretary, Katie Siegel. The first section on our agenda tonight is approvals. We have 2 items for approval tonight. The first is approval of tonight's agenda. Board may have a motion and a second to approve tonight's agenda.
So moved to Jim Baumstark.
Second, John Hagee.
This is a voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Next, we need a motion and a second to approve the September 21st, 2020 and September 28th, 2020 regular and executive board meeting minutes. May I have a motion
So moved, John Hagee.
and a second?
Second, Diane Stefani.
This also is a voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing no opposition, the motion carries. So now we come to the communications portion of our agenda, and we begin with superintendent comments. So I will turn it over to Dr. Deli, who will give us an update on our hybrid plan.
Thank you, Mrs. Jack-Torowitz. I appreciate that. Under superintendent's comments this evening, we do have a brief presentation that we would like to share with you regarding our update on hybrid learning. Before we do that, I must use this opportunity to offer my continued thanks to our students, to our parents, our teachers, our support staff, our building administrators, and our Board of Education as we continue the teamwork that we've been engaged in for so long during this pandemic. What we've been able to do thus far is really a credit to everyone working so nicely together, and I can't express my thanks enough for that. As you know, we did, as a school district, shift to hybrid learning on September 29th. And since that time, I have been really pleased overall with our migration into that platform of learning. As I've said before, and as I'll say again tonight, as imperfect as a structure it is, we are functioning, I think, quite well educationally, operationally, and in accordance with public health guidelines. We're acutely aware, though, that not all children are doing equally well under this kind of a learning format. We know that there are individual challenges with children and within families, and we're doing our very best to keep a level of connectivity and meaningful education taking place with all the challenges that it comes with. We do, however, have a significant challenge before us that we will talk a little bit more toward the latter end of the presentation. And that is, we have increasing COVID metrics that we must pay attention to and that we will talk a little bit more specifically tonight. But with that, I'd like to get into our presentation. You'll be hearing from several different participants as we go through the presentation. Thank you.
on mute, sorry. I'm going to begin the presentation. My name is Mary Garrity, the Executive Director for Student Services, and I'm going to begin talking about our health and safety protocols. And yes, our safety procedures do work. We are following the 3 W's: wear your mask, watch your distance, and wash hands. And I'd like to note that our positive cases that have come into our building have been the result of community spread outside of the building. So none of our close contacts to positive cases in our schools have led to another positive case. So we are really working hard on compliance with masks. And we know that there are some students that have more difficulty due to their ability to understand and tolerate. So we manage this through teaching and holding expectations and persistence. We are cleaning and sanitizing our buildings every day and twice daily in our EC through 5 buildings. Self-assessments are crucial for all staff members, students, and visitors. We are always adjusting based on the guidance that is given to us in terms of who must quarantine, what states, and different things like that. But it is so very important that everyone must comply to this and complete that self-assessment every single day. We have developed a contact tracing and communications procedures, and we have contact tracers in all of our buildings. We're continually tweaking those procedures as this is new and different for all of us. And we do have our infirmaries staffed every day and sending students home if they are showing any symptoms. But overall, very positive with our health and safety.
And as Mary said, we do have the self-assessment that we staff and parents take for children every morning before they come to school or work. And we have ongoing conversations about how to support parents and staff to make it as easy as possible. We know it adds time in the day for everybody. And one more thing to remember. So we've been sending reminders and looking for ways to make it as easy as possible, because compliance with this self-assessment increases time in classrooms. So if students come to school not having completed the self-assessment, they have to go through the process at school, and it just delays their time to get with their classmates in their classroom. So we continue to look for the best ways to increase compliance.
So my name is Brian Engel, and along with Dr. Silverman, we're going to be sharing just briefly a little bit about where we're at with the transition with teaching and learning. And again, to echo what Dr. Daly shared, it is a testament to our families, to our students, and especially to our teachers for being able to adapt and adjust in these certainly very unique times with our instructional models. And to that, as we've laid out throughout the process, it is again, a very unique time for all of us to go through. And we've been working on what is best practice in each environment. And it's been an evolution, both from the spring to the fall and then to now, and trying to determine and work on what are our curricular and instructional focuses, and being comprehensive that we're covering all the key critical standards for each grade level during the time, whether it is in person or it is remote, or it's full remote as part of the GOAL program, and making sure that those are all in alignment and pacing at the same rate so that we're able to meet our curricular objectives each trimester, so that when people do elect to make changes and make movements, they're able to do so. Dr. Silverman, would you like to share a little bit about some of the instructional opportunities that have been provided?
Yes, so also along with the notion of comprehensive curriculum experiences for our children, we're also talking about comprehensive supports for multilingual learners, our student service supports, to ensure as well when the environment may change or we may have to pivot, or when we talk about these different curricular delivery models, we're also meeting the needs of all of our children, along with differentiation, small group instruction, conferring, the opportunity to really get to the level of understanding for our teachers so that when they're with our children, through providing exceptional experiences, again, whether it's in the classroom in the hybrid scenario, or it's in full remote, or when we blend those different opportunities. So in terms of the instructional overview, it's a lot of communication. We have teachers meeting in their teams every week. They have an opportunity to articulate both sort of in horizontal and vertical pathways to ensure that the pacing remains consistent. And it's an opportunity, again, to talk about assessments, both formal, informal, formative, those different opportunities to, again, understand the depth of learning that our children are experiencing over these last couple of weeks, and then how they're going to shape instruction for the future. And the future, again, we're leaving it open and flexible, and opportunities to make improvements with our children.
Yeah, one of the things that we have seen as a positive moving through this process has definitely been the ability to access increased authentic data collection points. And, through the utilization of opportunities like Seesaw, as well as Schoology, and enforcing with Artsonia and Google Docs, being able to see and reflect on student work, while it might not be 100% in person, or it might not be as in a similar fashion as it would be in the past, it has provided opportunities for students to provide insight into what they're learning, share opportunities, things for that are their strengths, and also areas for weakness, and having the teacher be able to review, assess, and then adjust learning accordingly as we move forward.
And then one last part related to what Brian was talking about is engagement. And in traditional sort of learning in the past, we would concentrate on about 5.5 hours of, we'll call it instructional learning, where the child is either supported or guided with their teacher. And again, we're sort of flexing and learning how that model works with screen time. That is an element. When we also look at state recommendations in terms of how much screen time, but ultimately, again, the synchronous, asynchronous, teacher-guided, teacher-direct instruction, the opportunity for small group instruction, for conferring one-on-one, breakout rooms in Zoom. It's a plethora of these amazing experiences that our teachers are creating every day for our children. We're just super excited how it's coming together.
Yeah, I think ultimately, just to wrap up this slide, is that, again, a testament to all that have been involved, especially the students and our teachers, that everybody I've talked to is looking forward to the time period in the hopefully not too distant future, but let's just say next year or whenever, when we can take everything we've learned now and utilize throughout this process to adapt and adjust and apply it to an in-person, consistent environment moving forward, because there is a lot of great things going on in this very chaotic environment that I think ultimately will help benefit students moving forward, not just this year, but more importantly in the years to come, as we capitalize on new ways in which students can learn, as we move back into a more normal environment. Thank you.
So social emotional learning is embedded throughout a child's school day. That happens during, when we're not in a pandemic, but it's even more important during this time. It doesn't just happen one time during the school day or one time during the week. It happens throughout their day. It's about relationship building, community building, emotional regulation, and everyone's mental health. So we have Second Step, which is our core SEL curriculum, and they do weekly lessons, both in goal and in hybrid. We also have available, if you have not had an opportunity to look under on our website under Be Well 34, there are so many resources, as well as being able to look under D34 Parent Connect. We had a recent Parent Connect called Lean on Me. And if you missed it, please take some time. You can find it on our website under the D34 and listen to that Lean on Me webinar that we had, and some of our psychologists, our coach, our social emotional coach, Dr. Gebhardt, was a part of that, as well as the Family Service Center. So we have many podcasts on there from last year, and more podcasts are coming. So we are a community, and we do depend on each other, as everyone has stressed here tonight, for our health, our safety, our social emotional support. It still remains the #1 priority.
When it comes to operations, I think we can celebrate some success, and we can also find some opportunities to improve. When we moved into the hybrid model, we had to increase many of our routes to provide the half-day model for kindergarten through 5th grade. And that's actually been going well. So shout out to the schools and to our providers, Alltown and Safeway. When it comes to food service, I think we've done a really good job of distributing meals both inside the school for kids who are attending and outside for pickup. However, we saw higher numbers prior to going into hybrid. So that's one area that I think we can make an effort to increase. We're going to do a survey, and we're going to find out if there's other times or locations that might help improve. But we are seeing the numbers a little bit lower in terms of meal distribution. So that's definitely an area we're going to try and improve on moving forward.
HR is a constantly shifting landscape. So there are many opportunities for us where we have recognized celebrations, being able to provide mentors, continue to provide mentors for our newly established mentor program for our new staff. And given that we have a number of new staff this year due to the challenges with the pandemic, the mentor program is all that much more important. We have reached out to substitutes who are very impressed with all of the safety protocols that are in place in the district, helping them feel safe and secure coming to work within our district. That said, we also have challenges as substitutes are also concerned about their own health and safety and limiting sometimes their exposure. So looking at ways we can continue to bring substitutes into the district and help ensure that they are ready and willing to work should they be needed is one of the areas we continue to explore. Our support staff just experienced their first professional development day of the school year just last week. And while we did have to provide most of it virtually in order to give the buildings a little bit of a rest and reduce congestion during parent-teacher conferences, we also saw great success with that medium, as well as for those who came in to have some hands-on training, again, done with all of the safety protocols in place. And I must give a special acknowledgement to our staff who work very hard at managing those protocols for themselves and helping our students learn them as well. We are exploring new ways to provide support at the buildings, including the hiring of lunch supervisors at the middle level, now that their lunch experience is a bit different than it has been in non-pandemic settings. And we're also exploring how we could use volunteers to support some of the supervision needs at all levels. Because again, the pandemic provides us with new challenges, and fortunately, we're a flexible and adaptive district in looking at how can we problem solve and bring solutions to the table. So we're going to continue in HR to look at those ways to support principals and other administrators as they're going about the business of school and ensuring that our teachers and most importantly, our students can be in every day.
And now we are looking ahead. You parents received an email today about registration for trimester 2. That is open now, and parents can make their choice to remain the same or move environments, and that will be open in Power School through October 30th. And once that closes, we'll look at those numbers to ensure that we have staffing adjustments and that we're doing what we can to ease any transitions for students and families. So the second trimester starts on November 23rd. That's when that change will take effect. Brian, did you want to add anything to that?
No, Kathy, you did a wonderful job. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brian.
Can you hear me now? Helps when you're not muted. So I do want to take an opportunity and talk a little bit about metrics as we move forward. It's obviously a very important variable in our decision making. And so just to reiterate a few things, the first of which is we look at many different sources when we look at data. We certainly have our own district data, our in-house data, if you will, that identifies the number of cases, close contacts, and data that we collect on our self-assessments. And I think, you know, one of the things I'd like to highlight on the self-assessment, and it was referred to earlier in our presentation, is that there is a screening question that deals with travel outside of the state to areas that are designated as hotspots. And this is, I think, a good time to remind those who it may impact that the school district does require quarantining on return from travel to a hotspot. And more often than not, we're seeing cases where athletics is intersecting with that particular rule that we have. There are other examples as well. But I wanted to take a minute to highlight that is a school district expectation that we have for quarantining when returning from those hotspot areas. We also look at township data, guidance from the Cook County Department of Public Health, the Illinois Department of Public Health. All those agencies together, we're very mindful of the data that they're providing. It's important to be tracking this data for a number of reasons. One is, and we'll talk more about this, is to always be prepared in the event that the school district or a school building or a particular classroom within a school building might need to shift to a full remote scenario because of an outbreak or because the COVID numbers just in general at the county or local level are such that it is ill-advised to continue in any form of an in-person learning platform. So just by way of reminder, and we did touch on this the last time we presented, but it's I think a good time to review this and what adaptive pause really is. And it's part of the guidance from the Illinois Department of Public Health and ISB. It's really a strategy that school districts have at our disposal for the movement to any level of remote learning from whatever form of in-person learning may be existing. In our case, we're in hybrid learning, but it gives us the opportunity to shift temporarily into a remote learning situation. And that has been in place actually since the beginning of the school year, this provision, this guideline. And adaptive pause may include, as I indicated, a pivot to remote learning that may impact just a classroom or a grade level or a particular wing within a building or a particular school building, or it could be a district-wide decision to move to remote learning. Several adaptive pauses may be needed throughout this pandemic. One certainly doesn't know. We're mindful of the impact that moving in and out of adaptive pause means for children, for teachers, for families, but it's an important transitional element that we always have to keep on our minds. So internally, we publish this and update it weekly. This is our COVID-19 case tracking. You can see the numbers in total at the very bottom. And of course, it's broken out by school district, which and by school building, I should say, including goal and district office. And those numbers are updated weekly, Kathy. So this is as good as what date?
This is from Friday. Actually, we
Okay.
did a minor update Friday night.
Got it.
Saturday.
Okay, thank you. So this is our way of identifying for you total positive cases by building, the number of cases that would otherwise be new cases, total exposures, close contacts, same with the new close contacts. And so this is our way of sharing with you more internal data to the school district and by building. Like I said, our data sources are many when it comes to COVID tracking. The Illinois Department of Public Health is really the epicenter for this, but it does include Region 10 data and suburban Cook County, as well as the Northfield Township zip codes that you see there, the 600, 25, 26, and 62, which are primarily the zip codes that encompass Glenview and Northbrook, but not entirely Glenview. So Glenview consists of 4 zip codes that you can see listed there. The township did agree to expand the interpretation of the catchment area to be beyond just Region 10 or Cook County into these zip code areas. And the Northfield Township Plus category consists of 17 zip codes. So it's increasing the circumference around the school district to just give us a better idea of what infection rates and other data are looking like within that type of an area. So this is our current township dashboard. And I spoke about this at the last meeting, and I just want to run through just very quickly again what this depicts, and then I want to just highlight a couple of changes that has taken place to this particular dashboard, perhaps since the last time you saw it. But on the top half of the screen there, you'll see what is essentially a legend, and you can see that it breaks out for us the qualifying conditions for minimal community transmission, moderate, and substantial community transmission. You can see the basic formulas to the right. Across the top are the categories, the cases per 100,000, which is a very important metric for us to look at, weekly positivity rate, weekly overall case number increase, and then the weekly youth, which are cases for individuals under the age of 20, those case number increases. And you can see the way the formula works under each. If you go down to the second half of the screen, you will see for Region 10, for Northfield Township and for the Northfield Township Plus zip codes, you will see the color coordination listed there. Of particular note, and again, I should highlight the time frame, which is from October 4th through October 10th. And the reason for that is these data are reported in arrears. And then there's actually some additional days worth of lag time before they're published officially as rolling averages. And so of particular note, you will see here under Region 10, weekly cases per 100,000, that number being 129. And really what that represents is that there were 7 days of cases that were greater than 100 per 100,000. And so that is what flipped that particular cell red. Likewise, if you go right under that, the Northfield Township category was at one point green. It is now a yellow indicator. And you can see that as of the 10th, and again, I know it's strange to think about data as already being a week old, but this is how it's reported. You can see that the other categories looked, generally speaking, okay. And I know that's just kind of a generalization, but as you move right, it would be reasonable to assume that everything looked generally okay. One of the things that I do need to alert the board and this community about is that I do believe, and you have probably seen this on the news or read it in the popular press, about how the infection rates are increasing, and they are. And by Wednesday of this week, I do fully expect many of these cells that you see on the bottom half of the screen to turn red. And there could be as many as 7 additional cells that turn red. That's the red is the substantial community transmission. The case counts, the positivity rates, weekly youth case counts are all increasing. We know that because many of these things we can see trending on a daily basis, although they're not reported officially until there's a continuity of a certain number of days that are grouped together, and then it's reported out. It's certainly logical for one to ask what this means in relation to the wisdom of keeping schools in the hybrid format. It's a logical question. A little more difficult to answer, and I'd like to explain some of the reasons why. Unlike other counties like Lake County and DuPage County, Cook County does not have currently a decision tree in place that specifies the type of learning model that needs to be employed when metrics enter various transmission categories as are depicted on here. Rather, Cook County takes an approach where they will confer with local school district officials, namely the school superintendent, to assist in making decisions about learning format. So we don't really have the decision tree that other counties have at their disposal. You should also know, though, that township superintendents, myself included, will be meeting with public health officials from the county. I anticipate that that's going to happen in the next 48 hours. I don't have a specific day and time yet, but it's going to happen very soon. And my hope is that we will get some more specific guidance in terms of making decisions relative to an adaptive pause once the numbers are updated. And again, I'm not, the only thing I can do right now is give you my best guess as to how these numbers will likely change. And we will very likely see many of these cells turn red. We will, of course, communicate any shifts related to more remote learning as part of an adaptive pause. And we'll do that as soon as possible. I'm afraid I can't promise a specific amount of lead time prior to making a declaration like that, but we'll certainly give you as much warning and as much notice as we can, as we may need to contemplate an adaptive pause.
And I'll end with the public service announcement. As Lee said, we are expecting to see some of those areas on the dashboard turn red. And we have seen positive COVID-19 cases in our schools, but as Mary Garrity said earlier, it's a testament to the work that families are doing in self-assessing and working with their children on mask wearing, the work of the teachers in making sure students are safely distanced and practicing all the protocols that are necessary to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. And we have not had a case of COVID-19 occurring within our building, spreading within our building. It's all been community spread. So my PSA tonight is to everyone in the community to please continue those 3 W's that the IDPH encourages in all of us: to watch your distance, wash your hands, and wear a mask, not just in our buildings, but within our community and when you're out and about. So that is how we will continue to move forward and hope that we can keep us all in the community safe and healthy.
All right, thank you for that presentation. It becomes clearer and clearer that we are all interdependent. We all depend upon each other here. So I'm going to ask the board if anybody has any comments or questions. Katie?
Just a quick question about logistics, but if we do move back into a fully remote, I assume it's safe to say that the kids' schedule will look the same as it was before. So the synchronous learning time would be how it was prior to moving to hybrid.
Not
Right?
sure who wants to take that
Yeah, I
question.
don't know who wants to take that, but I'm just curious for parents planning purposes. Is that a fair statement?
Well, we're having discussions right now about that.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, we're working through the process.
Right.
There's a balance between adjustment of schedules, like do you move hybrid just to remote and then you keep a similar schedule, or do you go back to remote because of the fine art schedules and stuff? And to be honest, it could be a grade specific conversation, and that means for our ECK, it could be slightly different. We don't know yet versus our first through fifth. The middle school obviously will be the same because the middle school structure is set in a way that they can go hybrid, in person, full in person. It's set up. It's the younger grades that we've had to make alterations in any process that would are needing the greatest attention right now. But we certainly will have that information out soon in order to have people prepare properly.
Okay, yeah, I apologize. I realized after I said that obviously even my daughter as a kindergartner, her schedule changed drastically because of fine arts and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So I just was curious, but that was probably unfair of me. I apologize.
No, that's okay. The nice thing in all school districts are working on this process of going back and forth, and we're no different than that. And it is about, every time you make a change, even the slightest change, it has a ripple effect on different programs and different areas. And what we're trying to do is create the most consistency for our students, in specific to grade levels, as well as creating the most consistency for our staff. For anybody, and Katie, I know you were a teacher, for any time you set something up and then you change, it changes everything. And wanting to ensure that the best product is put out there with the least amount of change.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Mike?
Dr. Deli, so given that our township borders Lake County, Illinois, and maybe you don't have this answer right now, and if you don't, that's fine. I just would like it later. Given the metrics we have today, do you happen to know how we would fall if we did happen to be in Lake County? Given the proximity, it feels like a good proxy for what might be coming down the pike.
Yeah, well, yes. Now the metric system, not the actual metric system, but the system that they use to make these determinations formulaically is a little bit different than Cook. So it's hard for me to do an exact overlay, but I think it would be fair to say that if we existed in Lake County, we would be seriously contemplating an adaptive pause.
So further along the decision tree at a minimum, and possibly already having made the decision, somewhere between where we are now and having made the decision.
Yes.
Fine, thank you.
All right, anybody else? Jim?
In the event that Cook County really provides no guidance, have we looked at all about trying to think like a consortium of schools in the local community? And so instead of all these individual schools trying to all make their own decisions, like just somehow banding together some kind of group and saying, let's all kind of decide what we think makes sense, use our collective wisdom versus having every school have to do it individually. Or if not, maybe just throwing it out as an idea to consider.
Well, we are, I can't speak, well, I guess I can speak to both of these. So we are, as a township, so all the feeders and including District 225 are trying to speak as a group and trying to get some of these questions answered and some of the guidance issued. I can only imagine that, and this is all the more reason why the county should be providing some guidance on this, and I won't get on my soapbox, but the county must be receiving the same questions and requests for the same guidance from minimally other township configurations, or worst case from individual school districts. And so that's why we're really pressing for some guidance that really can be applied equally, in the sense that we're all in the same general area, and these numbers, these external numbers to the school district, are not fluctuating greatly from one township to the next. So we hope we can gain a little bit of ground in terms of, if not a decision tree, at least some level of commitment directionally in terms of what to do.
Well, and if I could add, I sent a note to Dr. Deli earlier today saying, hey, it doesn't matter if you're north or south of Willow. We're shopping at the same Target. We're shopping at the same Costco. We're shopping at the same, you get the Home Depot, you get the idea. We're worshiping in a lot of the same places. We're walking the same trails. Jim, I'm totally with you. I'd love to see the township take a leadership position and decide what to do. But I think, given that we're a 9-school district versus a 1, a 2, and a 3 school district, they're going to have a very different set of pressures in terms of how they're going to make their decisions. Their parents are they're at a very different place than, frankly, we are given our population. So I would love to get there. And I've encouraged Dane to try to seek that consensus. But I also don't want to put that pressure on Dane to say, if we don't get that consensus, it's on you.
Thank you. Well, there is consensus on one thing, and that's that we all want the same information. So that much I can tell you.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. I'm gonna just echo Kathy. Not just our kids, but all of us adults, we need to practice the 3 W's, watch our distance, wash our hands, and wear our masks. So the success of keeping our schools open depends on all of us doing our part. So that's my little public service announcement for tonight. And then that brings us to audience comments. This is the first of 2 opportunities for audience comments. Anyone wishing to address the board can submit their comments using a link found on our website. Please, when you register a comment, identify yourself and your connection to our district. We ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes in length. Kathy Kajigian will read all submitted comments. Please note that the board will be paying attention to all comments. We will not be responding tonight. We will be in listening mode only, but an appropriate response will be provided in a timely manner. Finally, we ask that you submit 1 comment per each opportunity. Kathy, are there any comments at this time?
There are 6 comments.
All right.
So the first one is from Jules Dashboard, a parent of current District 34 students. Thank you again to the school board and to the district administration for prioritizing the physical health of every student during this current period, and for prioritizing science, data, and sound logical judgment in the phased flex approach executed so far during this school year. Question for Dr. Deli. With weekly new positive tests in Northfield Township approaching 100 per 100,000 population, can you explain to all of us what exact criteria District 34 will use to activate and not activate adaptive pause? From April Perry, a parent of current District 34 students. On Wednesday, October 14th, Hanking parents were notified that a student had tested positive for COVID. Parents were also notified that if their child was deemed to be a close contact of the COVID positive student, they would be notified at some point. It appears that no classrooms were closed for any period of time beyond the Wednesday cleaning. It also appears that at most only 2 people were notified that they may have been exposed. This number is a guess based upon Friday's dashboard, which showed close contact new exposures at Hanking as 2. It's possible that both of these close contacts were based upon unrelated community exposure and that no one was notified that they were a close contact. I have two issues I hope the administration will answer. First, is it the administration's position that because desks are 6 feet apart, it is the default position that no parents or teachers will be notified when a student tests positive in a classroom? Second, I urge you to consider providing parents with additional information that would help them gauge the nature of the risk to their child. There were presumably 9 children and 1 teacher in the classroom with a positive student for the 2 days prior to the child becoming sick. If you aren't going to close down a classroom for several days, at the very least, those individuals deserve to know they were potentially exposed so they can make decisions about who they interact with when they go home. While I understand that this may be going farther than what a strict interpretation of the CDC's guidelines requires, I believe that most people would appreciate you taking a more cautious approach for our children and teachers. From Mara Kaplan-Pierce, staff member. With goal students coming into the hybrid learning environment, can you explain how that will work and what that will look like? Existing hybrid classes are already at their maximum for safety measures. Thank you. From Lauren Bauerschmidt, parent. Good evening, District 34 administrators and board members. I would like to follow up from a question I sent to the board on September 22nd. At that time, I was concerned how in hybrid, a teacher could, 1, talk to a microphone through a mask, 2, connect with students in the room, again through a mask and with students wearing masks, and 3, connect with students online all at the same time, all at the same level of connectedness as when everyone was remote. Now that hybrid has been in place for a few weeks, another concern is clear, the disconnectedness of the students in the hybrid phase. When all of the students were learning remotely, they could all speak and hear each other because they were all on Zoom. Now when students are discussing a topic in the classroom, the students at home cannot hear what the students are saying. For instance, today in social studies, my son couldn't hear what the students were saying in the classroom, so he could not participate in the discussion. I asked my son if he thought school was going better for him when everyone was remote or when half the students are in the building at a time. He said when everyone was remote. We had opted for goal and our expectation was that he and his classmates would all be remote, but goal does not exist for middle school. And even for the hybrid students, they can't fully participate on the days they are at home. I know you had received tremendous pressure to bring our students back into the building. I would ask that you continue to consider all of the consequences of that decision, both in terms of safety and quality of education. Thank you. From Jamie Fishbane, staff member. Thank you for your continued open-mindedness and resilience. Your strength does not go unnoticed, and I am proud to be an employee of District 34. Given current trends at the state and county levels, it is probable that our district and surrounding zip codes transition to moderate or substantial community transmission across all guidelines in the shared Northfield Township elementary measures. What are the plans around adaptive pause situations and expected or required length of remote learning? How do we plan to minimize any confusion or disruption if and when a change is needed? And the final one for this participation period, Joanne Penney, parent of current D34 students. Understanding that we must be sensitive to all families and the various stresses that people are managing, it feels like we are educating to the lowest common denominator. As the parent of a middle school child who is not struggling, the truth is she is bored, has little to no homework, and is not being stretched to her potential. What is being done to help the kids on this end of the spectrum? Specifically, how are we ensuring they are being prepared for the high school experience ahead of them? And that is the final comment.
All right, thank you, Kathy. And thank you to everyone who submitted a comment tonight. We will have one more opportunity later on in our meeting. The next item on our agenda is consideration of resolution, also known as our consent agenda. These are items that are either routine in nature or have been previously discussed by the board. We have 4 items on consent tonight. First, Resolution 2123, the personnel report. Resolution 2124, approval of payroll warrants. Resolution 2125, approval of vendor warrants. And finally, Resolution 2118, cooperative team agreement, middle school wrestling. And just a note on this last item, this is something we routinely approve every 2 years. So we'd like to keep on schedule with this approval, although it is questionable whether there would be wrestling this year, but we want to make sure that once we're able to do so, we are prepared for that. And so we're staying in keeping with our traditional practice of approving this agreement on this 2-year cycle. So may I have a motion and a second to approve tonight's consent agenda?
So moved, Mike Korman.
Second, Jim Baumstark.
And may I have a roll call, please? Katie, you need to unmute. Katie Siegel.
Nelson,
Aye.
Stefani. Jack Torowitz,
Aye.
Baumstark,
Aye.
Peggy,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
Corman.
All right, motion carries. That brings us to our discussion portion of tonight's meeting. And first up is the financing 2021 construction report. So I think that's Eric.
Yes, thank you very much. So I've invited Elizabeth Hennessy from Raymond James to join us tonight. The board appointed her as the municipal advisor during the sort of exploration phase of the referendum, and she presented several sort of options and parameters that work with the ballot question and sort of followed along with CFAC's recommendation. And, you know, that all sort of happened, and we passed a referendum just before the pandemic, and now the world has changed a little bit and the economic outlook is a little different. And Liz is here to just give us an update at the beginning of several months worth of discussion at the board table about the new estimates that are going to be coming out soon in terms of the work for this first summer, and then the financing to go along with it. So I thought we'd first start with an update from Liz, knowing that next month, when we come back to this table in front of the board, we may have some input from CFAC, which the board asked us to touch base with them so that they can sort of hear what's happening and give some input. And maybe me and Liz will come back next month with a little bit more of an update, and that might incorporate some of the recommendations from CFAC. So with that, I'm gonna pass it off to Liz. Hopefully she's a co-host and she's able to join, share her screen rather, and the presentation with us.
Great, thank you, Eric. Can everybody see the screen? Okay, great. Thank you. So tonight I'm going to update you on the bond market, and then we're going to get into what we told the taxpayers last March at the point the referendum was approved, and how those options are looking today, and some things for your consideration. So first of all, this is the AAA Municipal Market Data Index over the last year. And you can see we hit quite a bump in March, and that would be COVID. And the whole realization of the negative economic effect that would occur from the shutdown that was occurring with COVID. So the purple line is the 1-year MMD, the red line is the 10-year tax exempt rate, the yellow line is the 30-year, and the blue line is the treasury rate. And municipal interest rates typically follow the treasury rate. So when the kind of dawning of what was going to occur with the global pandemic became realized, many bond investors, especially those in bonds that are dependent on sales tax and income tax, went through a massive selling phase, anticipating downgrades and possible defaults for some bonds. So there were a lot more sellers than there were buyers, and interest rates went up a whole 2%. The interesting thing is the Fed rate, the 10-year treasury, did not follow as much. So this is what we call really a dislocation in the market. And the Fed saved us with their intervention of keeping interest rates low and offering to be the ultimate purchaser of municipal bonds. So that brought rates down about 150 basis points, but we still had some extreme volatility until we kind of hit this very low rate phase this summer. And in fact, we hit another historic low point in interest rates in August of 2020. And in the last several weeks, we've seen rates increase slightly, mostly because of supply. There are a very large number of issuers trying to get into the market before the presidential election because of the uncertainty about what changes might occur. So it's a very different market and it presents some opportunities for the district. Here's the actual numbers. So you can see the rates when the Board of Education passed a referendum resolution, and these are the interest rates on December 11th of 2019 that were used in all of our examples to the community and the taxpayers. So then you can see rates kind of coming down dramatically. We hit a low point in March just before it all kind of went away with this 2% increase in rates on March 23rd as the realization of the possible recession due to the pandemic. And then we hit this new historic low in August, if you can see second to the last column on the right, on August 7th. And the amazing thing about these interest rates, not only is the volatility, but just to see how low the rates in years 1 through 10 are. And at this historic low, we didn't even get up to 1% until year 18. Here we are most recently on October 5th, which is now even a couple weeks ago. And you can see that rates have come up, and this is again driven by supply in the municipal market. So just a few points that I've kind of already mentioned. On Friday, August 7th, the AAA Municipal Market Data Index reached its all-time low in the 10-year of 0.58 and the 30-year 1.27. And throughout the summer, we really had strong demand from bond buyers, so that was good. And then the recent Fed action to buy all types of municipal debt under the $2 trillion stimulus package really made a meaningful impact on the municipal market. So you can see the some of these highs and lows. We go to the next page. The other major thing that impacts bond rates are the inflows and outflows. So even going back to the fourth quarter of 2010 and 2011, that was in the height of the recession that started in 2008. And whenever you see red lines below the bar, that's investors selling. Whenever you see green bars above the line, that's investors buying. So if we kind of go through history, we can see in that March timeframe, that dramatic bar headed south, that's the selling that occurred in the middle of March. But since then, we've had inflows, meaning investors are buying again, due to the kind of the strength of that $2 trillion package of aid from the federal government. So that's just a little history. Now we've got so many bonds coming into the market, we're having really more supply than there are purchasers. But I will also mention these AAA rates, which look amazing, are for the strongest rated AAA states in the nation and don't necessarily apply to Illinois issuers. Having said that, school districts are among the most stable issuers throughout this pandemic. So credits like the Regional Transportation Authority that is dependent on RTA, Metra fares, those credits are not doing well. Anything that is dependent on sales tax, county bonds, city bonds, and then state bonds dependent on income tax, those are the more vulnerable credits. So from an investor point of view, school districts that are dependent on property taxes, even though we could see some reduction, possibly for collections of property taxes. They are the most stable issuers right now, and investors are really looking towards them. So that's a quick market update. I start here with what we call the promise, and I apologize that these numbers may be small on your screen. But what we talked to the community about in December of 2019 was the issuance of 119 million referendum bonds issued in 4 tranches in 21, 22, 23, and 24. Our first issue was going to be 40 million, then 34, 27, followed up by 18 million. And we've stretched that over a 23-year period of time, actually 24 years. And the annual payments that we discussed with the voters at the time were $7,580,000 to round it. So that's an important number, and I want you to keep that in your mind as we look at where we are now. Also, back in December, when rates were much higher, as we discussed with the board then, we added interest rate cushions just to make sure if rates went the other way, we were protected and we could in fact deliver the promise to the taxpayers. So this spreadsheet we call the promise, and again, that annual debt service number for the referendum bonds is $7,820,000. So here's the capital plan, and as Eric mentioned, this is yet to be updated, but the referendum bonds were timed in such a way to provide the funding needed for the original capital plan. This also included some non-referendum DSEB bonds that would be issued in 2024 in the amount of $9,380,000. So just to recap the sources and uses of the funding plan, we are looking at 119 million of referendum bonds issued from 2021 to 2024, 9,380,000 of 2024 non-referendum debt service extension-based bonds, annual capital outlay of 1.2 million over that period, and a cash contribution of 20 million, bringing the total project to 149,580,000. So we updated the plan, and I'm kind of looking at 2 options for you to consider, and there's going to be more, I'm sure, but because we don't know much new about the capital plan yet, I know you're hard at work at it and we'll have good information soon. Using the same issuance schedule at today's rates, putting a 50 basis point cushion on the $40 million issue we're planning to do in 2021, a 75 basis point cushion or 0.75% on the 22 issue, a 1% cushion on Series 23, and 1.25% cushion on 2024. These are the new numbers we come up with. And if we try to stay within that annual payment amount, that $7,880,000 or so, what we can do, because interest rates have changed, even with these cushions, is shorten your payback schedule by almost 3 years. If you look at this blue box down here, this shows that the debt payoff is now closer to 21 years versus 23 levy years that we originally talked about. And you can see how low the interest rates are. So let's just look at the 2040 issue, which was very short, and each subsequent issue wrapped around it. Right now, we're looking at an interest rate of 1.48%. That includes a 50 basis point cushion. So what that tells you for your AAA rating, you're looking at under 1% on that first issue, just to show you how low interest rates are. The other thing I should have mentioned earlier is your AAA rating has never been more valuable. In this pandemic, and investors are very interested in only the strongest credits. So the difference between a AAA rating and a AA rating used to be something like 15 basis points, maybe 10 basis points. It's now 20 or 25. So that AAA has never really been more valuable. So it's showing its worth. So here's one idea to shorten everything up. Another idea is to make the annual payments all lower. So stay with our 23, 24-year payback, but let's just lower everything down based on the current interest rates. So that's certainly possible. And trying to come up with a good description of this, I struggled a little bit, but I call it the leg in level debt service. And the reason I call it leg in, if you look at the 2020 levy year, which was the first year in our promise, we've actually made the payment even lower yet, something like $5,876,000, and then go to our level payment structure of $7,050,000 or so. And the idea is, gosh, maybe this option would give, if people are struggling with employment or whatever during this difficult time of the pandemic, maybe that would be an idea the board would be interested in. So just two options, but the approaches are, I think, philosophically something you might want to think about is either shorten up the debt and keeping the promise exactly as was told back in December of 19, or within the same time frame, just lower all those annual payments so the impact is less. And I know the question you're all asking is, well, what does this mean on the 500,000 market value home or a home? So let's look at this summary chart. Back in December of 19, the average annual debt service, as I mentioned, was $7,581,000. The average annual tax rate impact for the bonds was about 40 cents. The percent increase over the 2018 total tax rate, which is what the most recent data was back then, was about just under 5%, if you remember that promise. It increased just under 5% on your total taxes. And then the total request per thousand of taxes paid was $49.76. So if we look at, this 500,000 market value home, we're looking at annual payments of the actual promise of about $469 a year. Okay, and our final maturity is levy year 2042. That would be taxes paid in the year 2043. Total debt service and the promise was around $175.9 million. Option one is that accelerated option. So if we're looking at that same 23-year period, the average is down to 6.6 million. But that assumes that we're not paying any debt service in those last 3 years. So that's not the best comparison, I think, in this analysis, because it's going to be essentially exactly the same as the promise, the 7,581,000 and the 40 cents initially, but over time, it's 6.6 million, and over that 23-year period of time, it's 0.35%, as well as a lower increase on average over that same time period, 4.3 or $43. The payments very similar. The dollar paid in 21 and 22 are identical to the promise. The difference is the final maturity in option one is accelerated option is now the year 2040 for taxes paid in 2041. The total interest debt service paid over the life of the bonds by the taxpayers is dramatically lower. It's 151 million versus 175.9 million. So that's where the super savings is in option one. It's the interest paid over time. Option two is that leg in option. So here we actually have a lower annual debt service payment, almost by more than $500,000 over that 23-year period. Instead of 40 cents, we're at a 37-cent annual tax rate. The percent increase is 4.6% as opposed to 4.9. And then the referendum debt service in levy year 20, this is that smaller amount, that 5,876,000 that we're using just to leg into the level total payments, which are right around 7 million, as you can see above. So for a taxpayer for the levy year 2020 for the taxes paid in 21 for a $500,000 home, that's where you're going to see the difference. The first year's $363. Then the next year, 2021, is $436, and it stays at that level for the full 23-year period. So the final maturity is the same as the promise for levy year 2042 for taxes paid in 2043. You do have lower total debt service because we've got lower rates. 161 million in this example versus 175. So still good savings, not as dramatic as the accelerated option, but just a nice reality based on the lower interest rates. So, and we feel that interest rates are going to stay low for a while till we really recover out of this pandemic. The Fed is pledged to keep the Fed's fund rates close to zero. So we do have the cushions that I described also plugged in here. So if we do have rates float up based on whatever happens in the election coming up or not, we have that taken into consideration. So I've been doing a lot of talking. I will just stop here and see if you have any questions.
I do.
Go ahead.
Hi, Liz.
Hi, Scott.
You're very conservative with your rates here, giving 50 basis points on a 1.48. That's really conservative. I like that. That's great. We're going to do a great job for the taxpayers here, is what you're saying, correct?
Yes.
I mean, one proposal is 24 million less and the other is 14 million less over the life of the bonds, which is substantial. So, and that's with your higher projections, of possible. I don't want to complicate this before you get to the CFAC, but are there other ways to tranche it so that we could take advantage of these super low rates right now?
There are. So we really need to see how much money you need when first, which I know is coming. But here's the other kind of philosophy. When rates are super low, it's great to lock in those low rates. The downside of that is, let's say we issue the maximum we can. And if you recall from our referendum discussions, the maximum we can issue at any one time is the amount we expect to spend over 3 years. And that's federal tax law. So let's say over the next 3 years, you can spend 75 million. And we issue that all now and lock in these low rates. That's great, but the time factor is also a component of your interest cost. And these interest rates that we're going to access in the municipal bond market are super great, but you're looking at longer term interest rates. What you can earn on the investment of those proceeds is minuscule right now. So you saw how low those municipal rates are in year one. I know, Eric, what are you looking at on the liquid asset right now? 0.3%?
We can open up a Marcus account and get 0.6.
Plus $500.
So that negative arbitrage concept is, something to keep in mind. Typically, when you look at low interest rates, you want to issue as, the bonds kind of as
we spend them?
Yeah, just in time as you spend them.
Beth, do you prefer Beth or Elizabeth?
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth, thank you. Can you go back to the slide that showed the initial $20 million tranche from the district?
Yeah.
Oh, this slide. Yeah.
One more back.
Mm-hmm.
So what's in my head right now is, why don't we flip the script, move that 20 million back to 25, 26, 27, so, the other people's money theory of money. And we take 60 million on the front end in 2021, and we push Dane and Eric and the team to be super aggressive on construction. I'll help. and make sure we don't run afoul of those laws. But it seems to me that we should be spending other people's money before we should be spending our own in this environment.
I would agree with that. Absolutely.
So could we see a model where that's flipped?
Yeah, so this 20 million would go into the 40 million. So we have 60 million as the first issue, and we'd probably lose this 2024 18 million. And yeah, I think that does make sense, especially kind of given where we're at today. And then, you know, we have 119 million authorized. We should use it. Rates are really low. I agree with that for sure.
Thank you.
Mike, just for people who are watching, when you say spend other people's money, just clarify what that means for people watching from home.
Sure. Okay. Well, that's, I'm probably not the best person to do this. Maybe Scott would be better, but I'll give it a shot, and Elizabeth can shoot me down if I don't get it right. There's a general consensus within business that it's always better to use other people's money before you use your own money. As an example, for your home, most people don't own their homes. The bank owns the home. You're using their money to buy the home, and then you make payments back to the bank. Well, this is kind of the same concept. This is using other people's money at a lower interest rate and potentially saving the cash that we have on hand for future expenditures, a rainy day, whatever the case may be. But as a general principle, the longer you can avoid to spending your own savings is generally thought of as favorable. And I would say in the current environment, even more so.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that you didn't mean spending other taxpayer money. You mean spending, you know, lenders.
I mean, the people that are loaning us the money.
Right. I just wanted to make that clear for everybody. When you say other people's money, you're not talking about taxpayer money.
No, you're right.
And you're also saving the taxpayers a lot of money by issuing while rates are really low. Yeah. So even at that 1.48% that Elizabeth marks, she's actually saying rates right now are about 0.98%. Yeah. So by doing this, we're saving money over the long haul, more accelerated for the taxpayers, especially come the back end. I just want to point out that that's what you're getting at, right, Mike?
Yes. And I want to throw one more thing into the mix. As I was listening to the presentation, Elizabeth, it made an enormous amount of sense what was going on. One thing I would ask you to change for the CFAC would be the vote for the referendum at the board was December. I think it would be helpful maybe to see when it was approved by the voters, which is a more relevant date, March 17th, in my opinion. Because I think the pre-March 17th and post-March 17th are going to be impactful. I think it's just going to be impactful to the conversation. And then further to that, why didn't we, I understand the cadence of why we're doing what we're doing, the way we're doing it. My question is, in August, we clearly didn't have the ability to pull a trigger on doing something aggressive when things were, I'm going to make up a number, 0.58. But I hope we're not allowing process, meaning that, you know, we're on this train track and we do it the way every other district does it. You know, we go down the road and everything is just going to line up the way it always does. I would like to think, and I know that I believe this board is creative enough that if we have to make a decision quickly to take advantage of the marketplace, that we should do so.
Right.
Is that realistic?
You know, the thing we absolutely have to have is the spend down. We can't issue the bonds without the spend down. And once we get that, then we know how much we're going to issue. We could start the process also to get the rating and everything in place. As you saw from those charts, we have to get on the 2020 levy. So all of these issues we had looked at issuing in January or February of 21, for example, 22, so on and so forth. So, you know, once we determine how we want to pay back these bonds, and, you know, how much we need to issue in this plan, we can be off to the races. But that kind of brings me to, you know, the next chart that Eric and I talked about for moving forward. On October 27th, we have a CFAC discuss and review these financing options. We'll come back to the board on November 16th with a recommendation from CFAC. And then on the 14th, I envisioned the board approving a parameters bond resolution for that first issue. And then I suggest selling in January. Depending on what's going on in the market, we can be certainly flexible and we want to take advantage of good rates. But typically January is very low supply of bonds with a lot of money looking to be reinvested. So that's typically why January is a really great month to sell. And then we would close, you know, early, it's sometime in February, and make sure we're on that 2020 tax levy for the plan.
So totally, Elizabeth, let me just throw two more dates at you. November 3rd, January 20th. There's going to be volatility in the market between those two dates. And I just want to make sure we're well positioned to take advantage of the market in that scenario.
You know, if you're asking me, can we get into the market on November 3rd or so?
No. I'm not asking that. I just want to make sure I don't want us to wait. I don't know what November 16th to December 14th dates are. That it's 28 days, I suppose, somewhere around there. I don't want us to be stuck focused on a meeting date when we can, I think, within 72 hours, call a board meeting.
I see what you're saying.
If we decide on November 16th, after we review the CFAC recommendation, that by December 20 or November 20th, we can make a decision and it will benefit the district and the voters and the taxpayers, then we should be prepared to do that. I just don't want to be stuck on this automatic train track of dates that I'm seeing up here.
Now, Mike, we'll take that into consideration. And based on the redesign of Springman, the re-estimation of Springman, I think it's going to probably follow something like this, but if we can speed it up, we will.
Well, let's push the design team. I don't want the design team to be the critical path.
Right. No. This is really about just summer of 21 coming into focus, and me and Steve and Dane and the team feeling good about all the work that's been, and then Santa Liz, okay, here's where we're at.
Thank you. I've said my piece. I'm out.
Well,
Mike, just to ease your mind, I'm sure the Fed will be participating in the market and taking care of the rates. They don't want to see the volatility we saw last March. So I don't anticipate that kind of volatility that we saw before.
I don't disagree, Scott, but I don't know how many more weapons they have.
Oh, they print money. What are you talking about?
Well, okay.
all right. Well, I assume that after CFAC meets, if the board needs to call a quick meeting, that Eric, I'll hear from you, or Dane or somebody, so that we can give board members and the public proper notice of a quick turnaround for a board meeting.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you, Liz.
Yes.
Yep, great. Any other questions?
Just a quick one on if we do the scenario where we take down 60 million right off the bat, you can still restructure the payment stream so they have sort of that levelized effect. I just wanted to make sure we're not like spiking the payments in the early years by doing something like that.
No, not at all. The option 1 or 2 that we looked at here are still very doable in that scenario, as well as, you know, any other options you would come up with.
And my second question is like hedging with forward contracts at all something that can be done as to way to lock in those rates in 3 and 4 years without a lot of cost, or is it just like too illiquid of a market, and is hedging not typically done to try and lock in low rates like this?
Hedging is possible. It's not really possible more than 6 to 12 months. But there is a cost to that, and it's typically at least 5 basis points a month.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the board? Right, I'm not seeing any. I want to thank you, Liz, for joining us tonight. You've given us a lot of really great information, and I'm sure we will be hearing from you and CFAC soon. So thank you.
Thank
And
you. Good to see you all.
good to see you. And everybody else, stay tuned for more on this. All right, that brings us to our second discussion item, which is the tentative 2020 tax levy. That's you again, Eric. Thank you.
Great. And can everyone see my screen and hear me? Yes. Great. Okay, so tonight is the first of a couple of months that we'll be talking at the board table about the upcoming 2020 tentative levy. As per usual, we've got a series of definitions that will be posted along with this presentation up on the web for review at a later time. And the question is, what is a tax levy? Well, it's a certification by resolution of the local tax revenue requested by the taxing body. This year, a little higher than normal, local tax revenue accounts for 81% of our operating revenue. This is a typical tax levy cycle, and we're right now in the fourth process of dealing with the levy before the Truth in Taxation hearing. The first step in a long list of requirements is the school board passing the budget, and that happened in September at the hearing, and that gives us both the spending and tax levy authority, which obviously is important. PTEL is the Property Tax Extension Limitation Law, also called the tax cap, came into effect in the mid-90s in Cook County. It's what says the taxing bodies will limit the annual tax extension increase to 5% or CPI, whichever is less, in addition to new construction or new property. Essentially, it limits the increase the taxing bodies can do, and that simply wasn't the case prior to this law coming into effect. This is the actual limiting rate formula. And a little bit about our historic total tax rates. And if you can take a look at the years along the bottom, what you'll see is this is following the 2009 recession, if you will. And what you see is that as the assessor started to bring down the assessed valuation, the rates went up. So in those following years, as the rate went up, the EAVs were coming down. And that has stabilized to some degree in the 2000 and, well, let me keep going here. CPIU, another important, actually the most important contributing factor to the increase in our property tax dollars. This is a 13-year look. And what you'll see is that the average for the 3 years is 2.1, 5 years 1.8. And the 10-year is 1.8. The bottom line here is that what we do know that's going to drive the 2020 tax extension increase is the 2019 calendar year CPI, which was 2.3%. And that's the highest it's been in a while. So we'll certainly take that in a year when otherwise really state and federal revenues are flat. New property is that other component that helps drive that increase. And that's especially important here in Glenview because we've got some decent developments that have gone on over the last number of years. So CPI is accounting for 2.3% of the increase, and the new property, which we're estimating at about 12 million, would account for a 0.5% increase in our extension. So if we're looking at 2.3 for CPI, another 0.5% for new property, we'd be estimating that the actual increase in extension would be around 2.87%. Last year in the 2019 tax year, we estimated 12 million, but as you can see, new property came in at 17.8. So you might say, Eric, you're estimating pretty low. The impact on new property on this fiscal year, because it spans two, is only in the $100,000 range. So even if I'm a bit conservative on the 12 million, and we came in more in the $18 million range for new property, we're only talking about another $100,000 or so. A list of what we do know and what we don't, because that's a big part of the tax levy process, especially in Cook County. We don't know a lot, and so we have to take a guess. and usually it's for more of a conservative guess so that we don't jeopardize losing any of these property tax revenues. Each increase is over the prior year extension. So if we ever sort of miss the mark, that would impact the district in perpetuity. Some of the things we know, again, CPI for the 2019 calendar year, 2.3. What we don't know yet is Cook County's existing EAV, what the multiplier is going to be, final new property values or rates. Again, estimating new property at 12 million, just in case we were off here. The levy that I'll show in a minute that we're recommending would account for up to 55 million in new property. So just in case there was a series of developments we just didn't have our finger on, we'd be able to capture that in this levy. Tax collection rate 98.8. Existing EAV is 0. If you recall, with the 2019 levy year, the county reassessed us, and our existing EAV went up 15% with that levy. But because it happens every 3 years, the years in between typically don't see much of an increase or decrease, really, if anything. I know the assessor has mentioned early on in the pandemic that they would be reassessing. I haven't seen anything yet in regards to that. And just to put your mind at ease in terms of this levy, existing EAV going up or down does not have a big impact, if not, has a very small impact. So nothing to be worried about, just in case the assessor does come back and reassess properties. Cook County, what I typically do is ask this board to approve another resolution in December that directs the county clerk to reduce the levy in only one fund, which is the ed fund. So we'll ask for everything we need and all the funds except the ed. We'll increase that, and then we ask the county clerk to reduce that levy down to the actual extension in the ed fund. And then the other piece to remember is that District 34, like many other districts, actually many years ago gave the county clerk a directive that said, please do not add the loss and cost factor of 3% in our capped funds. No need, we'll just take the request that we put in, and we don't have to play the game, if you will, of increasing it and then decreasing it again to the statutory maximum. So just a bit of historical context for a directive that was given many years ago. And tax levy requests are often more than anticipated extension amounts because of all the different factors that we talked about. And I'll give you an example here in this next slide of one of the years in which we actually cut the request down a little bit and came a little closer, too close to comfort. And if so, looking at 2017 through the 2020 estimate here on the screen, what you'll see is the levy request just below the CPI, the percentage increase over the prior year extension, what the actual or projected extension is to be, what the actual percent increase over the prior year extension was. So I'll just draw your attention on 2017. We asked for 3.5% over the prior year extension. We actually got 3.21, so very close. This year, similar to last year, actually, the recommendation is to go with the 4.87% increase over the prior year extension. But again, increasing the ask in the ed fund only because we know that they'll decrease it again and probably most likely give us an estimated extension of 54.4 million. And so what that would equate to in the capped funds only is a 2.87% increase. I will point back to the presentation that Liz just gave, and absent any new estimates for summer of 21, it's possible, especially if the board decides not to use the cash contribution up front, we'll come back with a new estimate of both capped and non-capped funds and what we think the increase would be, especially given the ongoing discussion now about the bonds, because this only shows one component of the taxing process, especially when we're debating issuing some rather large amounts in January of 21. So this is a typical slide I try and show. It's got the 2019 actual extension, the 2020 tentative levy that we're asking for, recommending that we ask for tonight, and then what the estimated extension will be. And if you take a look at O&M and the tentative levy for 2020 compared to the estimated extension, it's the same. Again, that's speaking to that resolution that will ask the county clerk to sort of reduce the ed fund tentative levy down to what we think the estimated extension will be. Again, 2.87% in the cap funds. If we stuck with the $40 million bond issue, that first issue, what would hit the non-capped or the bond and interest levy in the 2020 would be that 40 million, and it would have an effect of increasing our bond and interest payment from 3.8 million up to 9.7. It'd be 154% increase. However, again, that's based on a $40 million bond issue, so that obviously could come back to change in the months to come. Remember that the levy request is just a request, and it's above the estimated extension based on the unknowns. Extensions are based on the PTEL formula, limiting that increase. Remember that the extension will be increased across the boundary, and so individual tax bills may go up relative to surrounding property owners and what their increase or decrease in their EAV will do. And then the bond and interest levy is outside or above the cap fund, so that's something that sort of happens behind the scenes at the county level, and that's nothing that the board has to officially make a request for. Next steps would be obviously to have a discussion following this presentation, and then ask the board to vote on the 2020 tentative resolution, which would also call for a hearing and a notice that would be posted in the paper for the December, just prior to December regular board meeting, have that hearing and go over the final information that would be presented to the county. And with that, I'll open it up just in case there's any questions from the board.
Anybody with questions? Not seeing any at the moment, partially because, oh, Mike, I spoke too soon.
All right, so Eric, can you back up, I think 2 slides? One more. Sorry, it might be forward now. It might be the one that had the percentages. Yeah, it's number 14, I think. Yeah, could you pull that one up?
You see it now?
I do. Can you pull it up? There you go. So what's rattling around in my brain a little bit is the idea that ATIA was funded back 20 years ago with O&M funds from, okay, I won't say O&M funds. The construction funds were approved. The operations, maintenance, education, transportation, all these other funds were not approved at the time.
Right.
There are parts of the other buildings that suffered as a result of choices that had to be made at the time to make sure that ATIA could be up and running. So where my head is from an equity perspective, is 4.03% across the other buildings for what is your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th column? Is there even the 6th column? Is that the right number? So I just want to make sure we're thinking about, because the costs to maintain these buildings after we get done with all of this construction will be different than they are today. And I hope we're accounting for that cost of increase. It'll be different HVAC systems, it'll be different lighting systems, fire control, so on and so forth. I just want to make sure we're thinking through the 2nd, 3rd, 4th order effects of a decision made 20 years ago by the voters appropriately, and they get to make that vote. That we're rolling that forward now to make sure that the remaining 7 buildings have the equity that, in my opinion, they have due to them.
Eric, this is a budgeting question he's asking, right? Can't we technically move money between funds when necessary?
Depends. There's rules, right? General Assembly's been doing a 3-year rolling approval to say within ed, O&M, and transportation, there's some flexibility. Following, I think it was 09, they wanted to make it easier for districts to move money within. But there's the only fund that we're limited in is O&M. There's a limiting rate, and I look at them in the total operating funds, because you may have a bigger fund balance in your ed fund. Well, I mean, yeah. So is your question just, are we being mindful of the way we're spending O&M dollars across the other 7 buildings?
We talk a lot about equity. A lot. I mean, I hear that word a lot between ATIA and Springman, but also between kind of the buildings generally and how we educate our kids. And, less than a year ago, we were in the heat of a pretty significant referendum battle. And I just remember doing all the research on the campaigns that happened 20 years ago. And one of the things that I hung my hat on was the idea that because the referendum to operate ATIA failed twice, that essentially to operate that building, the remaining schools had to go without for 20 years. Now, I don't know how you make that equal, but I just want to make sure that both Dr. Deli and you, Eric, are thinking through, okay, that happened. We maybe should take an operational pause to say, we now have a different set of parameters. Here's really what I'm getting at. And it's kind of the same conversation with Elizabeth. My sense is that we are going through these processes as any other school district would go through. We are, it's October, this is what we do. It's November, this is what we do. It's December, this is what we do. I don't see creative thinking from our partners yet that says we're pushing the envelope to say, no, we're not just going to go with 4.03 in O&M. We're going to go past that because it makes sense to do so while we're also investing in our buildings, because there's economies of scale in construction. And I'm talking at the macro. I don't know what those numbers are. Now, if you tell me that's all been considered as part of the 2 previous evaluation sets that happened, fine. But if no one has thought of it yet because we just hadn't gotten there, I'd like to think we could get there and have a thoughtful conversation around, okay, well, it's clear that over 20 years, the 7 buildings that are not named ATIA went without. And how do we make that right? Again, writ large.
So, Mike, just a couple of observations. I think I understand your points, and they're well taken. I can't speak historically to the robbing Peter to pay Paul effect. Over time, it's not unreasonable to think that there wasn't some of that going on, because the across the 8 buildings, the 9 facilities that we have, there are varying levels of disrepair. And so I can appreciate the spirit of, as we reset from a more equal playing field across the district, that we don't fall into an old pattern, and that we are appropriating a reasonably good guess at being able to maintain that number of facilities moving forward without having to do what you have explained. And there has been thought that has gone into that. That's not to say that it might not need to be more refined, particularly as we move forward, but it's certainly something that we're sensitive to. I don't know, Eric, if you have something to add to that or not.
No, I guess the only other piece that I would add is, our estimated expenses are what they are. So if it's about taking the 5 million and how we spread it, that's one conversation. If it's about taking from the ed fund to give to O&M, you'd have to make a a conscious decision about what expense you are not going to have in the ed fund. So, yeah.
So I don't disagree with that. What I would say, what my final comment on this will be this. We have a unique opportunity with a design team that is not privy to these conversations to say to them, this is how we want you to focus. And if it is the case that the board through the superintendent and Eric, we decide that we want to focus them a certain way, now's the time to do that. And I'll go back to what I said earlier about being on the train tracks. To me, it feels like we're on the train tracks with Ron and with the team, and for very good reasons. But I don't want to be on the train tracks just simply because that's what everybody else does. I want to make sure that we're asking the hard questions in the right way. I'll leave it at that. And thank you. I'm sorry that I'm down a rabbit hole.
Not at all.
All right. Does anybody else have anything to add before we go to workman's comp coverage?
I'll just say one thing on that ATIA thing. I don't think it only impacts that O&M fund. I mean, I think all the operations of ATIA were subsidized, education and O&M. So whatever issue is going on there, it's across the entire spectrum. And I mean, it's a good discussion, but I'm not sure it feels for me a little misplaced with this tax levy discussion. And it's more of how we budget, because I think what we're basically getting is we're going to get at the end of the day the most we can get without doing a referendum. So at that point, it's really just trying to split it between the different buildings. If there's some equity issue we want to fix, that seems like it's more of a budgeting discussion, unless as Mike says, there's something we're going to ask the design team to do differently just to streamline costs or something. But I think we'd want to have them do that anyway. But
except to say, Jim, and I agree with you broadly, except to say that the maintenance funds of the building my recollection is that the construction funds are very different than the O&M funds. They shall not commingle. So clearly O&M funds, and I'm not talking about ed fund, I'm talking about O&M funds were moved ultimately from, and probably transportation and others, were moved from 7 buildings to make sure that we could feed ATIA. And my sense is that the ed fund is more about the levy for operating I guess you're right.
I took all the teacher salaries and
I
had
see
them
your
move to ATIA. Yeah.
Yeah, I see your point. It's a good one.
Yeah.
Agreed. Anything else? All right, then let's move on to workman's comp coverage, RFP. You're up again, Eric.
Great, thank you very much. So this year, again, the district asked our broker to seek proposals for a 1-year agreement with work comp insurance policy. And the carriers typically quote based on current annual payrolls. And what you can see on the screen is a low quote came in from our current carrier at $192,000 from the Illinois Public Risk Fund, which is our current provider. And so that's sort of the apples to apples. And then what they do is they take an anticipated payroll for the following year and then give us a quote for that too. So this year with the same carrier, we're paying $210,000, and now they've quoted us for next year at $202,000. It's a 4% reduction in fee. It probably has something to do with our experience, it has everything to do with our experience, which in part has to do with I would say the fact that we closed down in-person learning, and that had some impact. But they certainly want to retain our business, and of the quotes we took in, this would certainly be the low bid from our current carrier.
Okay, any questions? John.
Hold on. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I just saw briefly on the other side that the next lowest bid was $215 from Hartford.
Yes.
Okay. And I guess I just want to, that answers one of my questions. The second, and you don't have to answer these tonight, but 2 other questions. One would be, our current pool provide, caps an assessment at 10%. Is that per year? Can we quit after 1 year if we get an assessment of, say, we got $100,000 assessment. We'd only had to pay 20,000 the first year. Do we have to pay the rest? And my guess is we still do. It's just they charge you 10% a year, but it'll be interesting to find out. And then secondly, you know, the last time, it wasn't that long ago. It does predate your time here, Eric, but how much we had to pay to our last pool for an assessment, you know, I recall it was a pretty high figure. It wipes out these savings of $15,000 real quick. You know, like I'm thinking we paid like 90,000 or something. So if we could get that information.
So, and the only thing I would add is, because I know I asked this last year with Illinois Public Risk Fund, they do have the ability to assess us, but as they've said before, they haven't, you know, leveraged that assessment since inception. But to your point, John, it's you never know, and that they absolutely have the ability to us, you know, to
yeah. I mean, you never know. A pandemic might come along and throw everything upside down.
That's right.
Wait, so John, you're saying you think there was an assessment, and Eric, you're thinking there hasn't been? Is that just like a...
This particular pool has not ever assessed us.
Okay.
The previous pool we used did assess us.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
I will
endorsed by the ISB, I might add.
Yes. I will follow up with the board as soon as I get answers to that question.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Thank you, John. Any other comments, questions? All right, I don't see any. So that brings us next to the 2021 CFAC charge. I believe that's you again, Eric.
Great. So what we're asking CFAC, or what I'd like to ask CFAC on behalf of the board, is to yet again, and important again this year, to refresh the 5-year financial forecast. Again, things have changed, and so let's take a look at the assumptions, and let's see if we can do a refresh with the hopes of delivering a presentation to the board in January of 21. In addition, I'd like to ask CFAC to take a look at the debt structures we just mentioned and see if they can shed any other light or recommendations, you know, on the board's final decision. So if the board's okay with that, we'll launch a series of meetings to start that conversation in hopes of coming back with Liz with some of their input at the November board meeting for the first debt issue, and then be a presentation on the 5-year forecast in January.
And I imagine that 5-year forecast is going to show the impact of this last year and what might be happening for a while in the future, right?
Yes, in terms of economic growth, CPI, interest rates, the spending that the district has done this year and could potentially do next year. Absolutely.
Okay. Any other questions?
Eric, I'm sorry, may I just make a clarification first? Just so we're clear, I would like, with the board's support, to have the recommendations from CFAC be presented to the superintendent of schools.
Yes, it's your committee. The CFAC is a superintendent committee, not a board committee. So the report goes to Dane, and he will then share it with the rest of us. So,
I just wanted to make that clarification. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Dane. Anybody else? All right, moving on to Board Policy Issue 105. Dane, do you have any comments about the new proposed policy changes?
In this particular batch of policies, I didn't find anything of particular note that I thought was worth bringing forward or discussing.
The board has had an opportunity to review those. Does anybody have any questions about any of the board policies?
And these are a first review, by the way.
Right, this first read.
You'll see them a second time.
Okay, great. No questions or comments at this time. So that brings up the following meeting agenda. There are a few things there. You've had a preview of some of the coming attractions already. I just want to make a note at some point, if conditions are favorable, we will at some point try to attempt to meet in person, and we will give plenty of notice of that change in format so that everybody can adjust. At this point, seems that we have to wait and see what happens with our numbers and what might be happening in our schools before we can take that step. But it is always on our radar. But does anybody have any questions about the following meeting agenda? All right, seeing none, that brings us to the second and final opportunity for audience comments tonight. Just a reminder, we ask that you submit your comments using a link on our website. Please keep your comments to 3 minutes. Please identify yourself and your connection to the board. Remember, we're in listening mode, so we won't be responding, but you will get a response in a timely manner. So Kathy, are there any additional comments tonight?
There are no additional comments tonight.
All right. Wow, that's a refreshing change. That hasn't happened for a while, but we'll take it. So then that brings us to reports. We have 6 reports tonight: the FOIA report, the NSSCD board meeting report, the budget status report, current year financial projections, overview of teacher evaluation results 2018-2019, and report on pre-referendum expenses. Does the board have any questions on any of these reports?
Could I just ask President Jack Torowitz about NSCCD? I know you serve on that. Is there anything there we should be aware of?
There's nothing in particular to note other than the fact that they are still in remote and they have not moved to hybrid. Half of their schools in their co-op are in Lake County, and their superintendent just recently issued a communication to families that it is entirely possible that they will have to go into full remote soon, and that he would keep them posted. But other than that, there isn't anything, out of particular to note coming out of that report. But
Dr. Deli, does that impact us in any way?
Well, I mean, we're certainly, tracking some of their decision-making that way, but in terms of, how we service our children, we service, the vast majority of our special needs students in the district. That's not to say that we don't use NSSCD for other types of services, but we don't see any real impact on what they may ultimately decide to do. Like Natalie said, they're largely remote at this point.
If they decided to do something different, is there a trigger for us to say we are going to?
So the way NSSCD has decided to handle it, because they have so many districts in their co-op, is however the districts want to handle it, the programs that are housed in those districts will follow that district's plan. They do have, NSAE and, Mary, correct me, what are they? North Shore Academy and North Shore Academy Elementary. I think we have
Arbor Day.
Okay. And so we have some students there. Because they're housed there, those students would follow the NSSCD plan.
Okay, thank you.
So, any other questions?
Just a quick one.
Sure.
On the, this is probably for Eric, on the current year financial projections, I just noted that you had put one item in there of a favorable 160,000 to salary and benefits. Does that mean on the other areas that you feel like it's just all on track right now? Or are there any areas that you're currently watching and you just don't have enough information to make adjustments at this point? But I don't know, just my takeaway is that like everything's kind of on track and there's a little bit of savings in salaries and benefits. Is that how you would portray the scenario, or are there things you're watching?
It is, and there's a lot of moving pieces. We took on some additional costs in transportation that we didn't recognize until after the budget was developed. And so some of this is so out of the box, but as those transportation bills come in, those are outside, but those are just unfilled positions for the beginning of the year. And so that's an easy one off the bat. I ask HR, if you have unfilled positions, what's the savings? But hopefully those positions are getting filled. And so that will, those savings won't be realized. But yeah, other than that, I think we're on that and transportation. But otherwise, I think we're on track for what we budgeted. So whatever we could forecast, we're living, and yeah, we're on track based on that.
You'll think next time there'll be some sort of transportation
It's
adjustment.
transportation. Yeah, yes, absolutely. And yes,
Okay.
we know we picked up, you know, we in essence, we have the buses running the same number of routes for K-5 just in the middle of the day. So yeah, you should anticipate transportation exceeding what we budgeted throughout the course of the year. Absolutely.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, then I'm going to ask the board if there is any other business anybody would like to bring before the board. All right, seeing none, I'm going to ask for a motion and a second to adjourn tonight's meeting.
So moved. Mike Korman.
Second, John Hagee.
All right, this is a voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone who joined us tonight, and thank you to the administrative team for all the work you did in preparing for tonight. So thank you and have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night.